You must stay at home. Stay at home.
Hello and welcome to Lockdown, hosted by Steve Bomford with Mike Davis-Marks. Our armed forces operate in challenging environments. Week by week, we'll explore what we can learn from their experiences.
So in this episode, I had the privilege of interviewing Adrian Bell, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity. Mike, I believe you know him.
Yes, I know Adrian very well, actually. He's a contemporary of mine and known to many of his friends as Dinger Bell. And he's also what's known as a skimmer. As you know, Steve, I'm a submariner, so I'm below the waves, and all submariners call people that operate in ships above the waves as skimmers.
And I believe there's a bit of rivalry between the two.
No, surely not.
Surely not. So anyway, without further ado, let's listen to the interview and then we'll come back and have a little chat about it afterwards. So Adrian, can you tell me a bit about your career in the Royal Navy and particularly how that prepared you for lockdown?
That's a big question. I did 30 years in the Royal Navy before I decided it was time for me to leave and do something else. And 30 really wonderful years, lots of happy memories. And I decided to leave because I was out of step, I think, with the Navy, and it was time for me to go elsewhere. But you mentioned in that preparing for lockdown, and actually the most significant thing that happened to me in the Navy was very, very early on in my time when I was a little midshipman, lowest of the low, just turned 20, I think, and it was the Falklands War, and I got caught up with that. And that sort of set me up, as it were, for the rest of my naval career. And dare I say, to a degree, and I think back on it today, it did actually help me in sort of confronting the sort of challenge that we face at the moment, and also helped me to understand what it must be like for those in the front line in the NHS. Why do I say that? I mean, I was a little midshipman bobbling around in the off the sort of west coast of Scotland and England, doing fishery protection in a minesweeper, HMS Soberton. And the ship was due to go into refit. I was due to go back to Dartmouth. And suddenly we found ourselves recalled to Rosyth. We were taken off HMS Soberton and put on board a trawler that had just come in, still had a hold full of fish. And we were told to transform that into a minesweeper, and with 4 other trawlers, head to the Falkland Islands. At no notice, with no idea really of what was going on. We were taken up from trade, as I said, and we were the only vessels taken up for trade that were actually commissioned as Her Majesty's ships for the duration of that conflict. And down we went with no knowledge really of what was going to happen to us, no knowledge of when we were coming back, what we were going to be faced with. And we ended up, yes, we did the minesweeping off Port Stanley, but we ended up doing a whole host of things down in South Georgia in the Falklands, transferring people, soldiers from things like the QE2 to other vessels, logistics, store support, ammunition, you name it. And I grew up very quickly. I learned an awful lot about myself. I learned an awful lot about others and how people respond. And dare I say, I learned to deal with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. And that has helped me incredibly in my careers, both in the Navy and in the charity world afterwards. But also, I think in terms of empathizing, understanding those on the front line, they face a very different challenge. I was listening to a doctor on the radio this morning. She's been doing, 6 12-hour shifts. But in between that time, she goes home to her family. We didn't have to do that. And I think that's really quite difficult, hugely difficult, and something that we don't face. Yes, we're separated from our families. That's not nice, but equally it allows you to be in a sort of single place. If you're alternating between these things, that must be extremely hard. And so I can certainly feel how it must be for them. But in terms of us dealing with it and how we prepare, the Navy's given me all sorts of things that help me in this particular time. Part of which is the memories of all the good things that we did as well. And I was very lucky. I had a career, so spanned 30 years. I spent a lot of that time at sea. I was very fortunate. I had 3 sea commands. I had command ashore as well, and some very challenging jobs, especially in sort of strategic planning, finance, and those sorts of things. God knows how I got into that. So whilst this time of turbulence for us all is difficult, I do feel that having faced so much uncertainty in the past, having had to deal with these sorts of things, having had to deal with fear, having had to deal with the sort of loneliness that induces as well, does sort of make life a little bit easier now, if I can say that, but only a little bit.
I think you can say that. I think uncertainty is a word you've used quite a few times there. How do you cope with that, and how would you, our listeners, how would you suggest they meet the challenges of uncertainty?
It's silly little things. Routine is hugely important. We're social animals. We're used to doing things, and as social beings, we have a sort of drumbeat to our lives. We do things, whether we work or not, it doesn't matter. There are things that we do, and I find that if you live within the structure of routine, and I'm very, very strict with myself about a work week and a weekend, even in these circumstances. Work week, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I do my exercise, all that sort of thing. I prepare for the day, and I'll work through the day, and in the evening, have a bit of supper and chill. At a weekend, I will not get up at that time. I will do things differently to mark out the difference. And difference is very important because a routine actually can be really grinding if you don't change it at all. I will, gosh, it sounds a bit like a confessional. I will dress smartly for work still. I think, again, that's very important because it adds to the sense of being. I will always think about the future. We know this is going to come to an end. We don't know when, we don't know what that end's going to look like, but we can envisage a world where we've gone back to. We don't know, as I say, what it's going to look like, but thinking about these things, I'm always struck that out of adversity comes some really wonderful things. Go back to the 40s and the 50s and think of the Beveridge report that set up the welfare state, the Butler Education Act, the NHS that came out of that. Really big thinking in social terms came out of real adversity. And I suppose when we're grappling with uncertainty, at one level, it's that terribly trite, terribly sort of detailed thing about routine, about how we live our lives and all that sort of thing. And at the other time, it's, well, what's life going to look like in the future? And looking forward with optimism. The human race is incredibly resilient. We do get through these things. Yes, it's difficult. I mean, it's hugely difficult at the moment. A lot of people suffering, a lot of friends and families suffering. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. There always will be. There'll be a different horizon. And holding on to those sorts of things is very important.
That's very interesting. With the later question, I'll come back to that because I would quite be interested in knowing what you imagine the future will look like. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you, how has the RNRMC responded to the challenges of COVID-19? And is there any information that you can specifically pass on to our listeners, both as individuals and possibly organisations that you support or would consider supporting?
Certainly. We, in ourselves, we're not a service delivery charity. We work with partners to deliver all sorts of services. So in responding to the challenge, a few things, like every other organisation, we've had to adapt to working from home, and we've done that very successfully, I like to think. But actually, the big challenges that we face is how we fund the partners that we work with. Our investment portfolio has taken a real battering, and our income from that has gone shooting down. Fundraising, obviously, has gone shooting down, understandably. And so we do face a challenge on that side. But we have reserves, and we have reserves for a purpose. And this is the rainy day that we have reserves for. But also, we've got a cash flow issue. We're used to sort of cash coming in to keep everything going. And with incomes down, that changes dramatically. So I've had to restructure, dare I say, throw away the rule book of how we work, so that we can respond. And we've set up a hardship fund so that gives us an instant ability to respond. And we've already used that in the provision, for example, in the provision for children, very vulnerable children who don't have access to IT, laptops, computers, whatever, who are now having to be homeschooled. So we've given a large grant into that. Various things within the Navy for people who are in challenging situations, including all the medics, because there's an awful lot of naval medics on the front line, and we're sending them out some care boxes across the length and the breadth of the country, wherever they are. But as I say, what we've done is put ourselves in a good position to respond, put ourselves in a good position to continue all the partnership working that we do with our fellow charities, whether that's around relationships, because we have a partnering with Relate, with Home Start around families, with some of our veteran organisations around care homes and things like that, so that we can keep the money going, so that we can keep all that flowing and oil the wheels of all those services that need to be delivered. And that's a large piece of work, and we've taken our sort of cash flow from drying up in the summer to being now towards the end of the year, and a bit more work will hopefully tip us into next year while I do some more work on how we then keep it going after that.
So I guess that all depends on how long this lasts, really, isn't it? So you're trying to create a plan with no timeline. Am I right in thinking?
Yes, you are. And I think it would be foolish of us to say, oh, it'll all be back to normal by, because we know that that's not possible to say. So I'm trying to look at different scenarios of what does it look like 6 months and 12 months and 18 months. And those are sort of figures that I think I can deal with reasonably easily, because if I say 6 months downstream, it's not going to look a lot more different, I don't think, because things are going to take a long time to get back to normal. And we know that our incomes will still be suppressed. If we start to look to the 12 to 18 months, I think that's when things will be changing, and hopefully quite rapidly at that time. But equally at the same time is the tailwind, as I would call it, of this, which is, yes, we're away from the immediate problem, but then it's the economic turmoil that is going to sweep through this country and the world, and actually how people cope with that. And that's really why we have to be in a position to have the funds ready to do the sort of demand that will come now. I'm not expecting a lot of demand here and now. I am expecting it in the weeks, months, and dare I say years ahead.
Yes, that makes sense. You may recall when we spoke about doing this podcast earlier in the week, and I asked you a question you've kind of almost answered already about what will be the longer term impact. And you conjured up a mental image of walking through Southsea. Would you just revisit that for me? Because I think when people talk about economic impact, what does that mean for ordinary people? And I think you kind of made me think anyway of what that might mean.
Well, it's that mental walk that I take through Portsmouth and Southsea. If you just sort of, as I do, I live over in Gosport, so I get off the ferry, and I hit the bustle of the Hard down there. You've got the station, you've got the bus station, you've got the historic dockyard and the naval museums, Mary Rose, etc. People everywhere, taxis, buses, trains, noise, gun wharf. And then you toddle on a bit further, and you get into the sort of the Isle of Wight ferry areas. You then get into Southsea, the coffee shops, the bars, the shops, the people, the theatres, the cinemas, all that sort of thing. And it stopped. It stopped. the builders' vans, the building sites, the takeaways of the traffic, everything has just stopped. And that means that people aren't at work. That means that all of these things that have stopped all have a huge impact on each and every one of us. And I think a lot of us tend to live just about within our means, which means probably just a little bit outside rather than inside. And even if it is just a short period that people are impacted on, it puts a hole in their finances. And when you think of that mental walk and the fact that people aren't earning that money, the fact that businesses aren't working, all of those things aren't happening, then that impact on us all, because the local economies, the national economy have been hit in such a way, that isn't going to turn around overnight. And that's the sort of thing I think about. And also, how soon is it that people will be in a position to take that walk and to see it in that way again, that we're all able to congregate, we're all able to be together in the ways that we used to, in the cinema, in the bar, in the club, in the shop. And that's how I sort of think it through and why I end up where I do.
I think it's a really interesting way of it kind of explaining it in terms that people understand in terms of their local community and their locations and their habits that we're no longer, like going to work, that obviously for most people are no longer doing. So I'd like to ask you about how you and your family, or what are you and your family doing differently to get through this? So what are your top tips in terms of coping strategies? Have you started cooking, taken up a new hobby? Do you have time for any of that?
Cooking, I'm not allowed. My wife's a very good cook. She frowns on anything I produce. I am quite good at making coffee. What am I doing differently? I'm not getting out and about as much as I like to. I get more time to read, which I do enjoy. I'm hugely into current affairs and politics, and a greater understanding of that and the time to get into that, but also just to read books and have the chance to sort of, I suppose, drift off into those little sort of fiction fantasy places as well is really quite nice. But then also is the virtual gatherings, staying connected with people, going for a drink, as it were, and a bite to eat with friends, and getting used to doing it on a laptop, iPad or whatever, and finding out actually that's a lot of fun. In particular with our children who both live and work in London, but also other friends, and sometimes friends we haven't seen for quite a long time. We find ourselves making the time to catch up with them. And therefore, I think it's weirdly this time of being isolated, just my wife and I in the house, but being connected to folk that we probably wouldn't have seen this year, or certainly this time of year or whatever. And that's added a new dimension to our lives. So I suppose there's positives amongst all the negatives.
I quite agree with that. I think technology has actually found itself a really positive use in terms of, all the various platforms that we're using to talk to people. And I have spoken to so many people that I might just normally text or do a message on Facebook or whatever it is. So that's been quite an interesting change. And I think it'd be interesting to see if we maintain that.
Well, I hope we can, actually. I hope we can do that. And I'll tell you the other thing I would really like to maintain is some of the peace and quiet that comes out of this. I don't know about you, but I am so aware of birdsong. I'm so aware of nature in a totally different way. I've always been sort of, aware of it, but it just sort of in a deep way that I haven't before. And I think one of the things I will miss when some form of normality returns is that greater connection, stronger connection with nature.
That's really interesting you say that, because obviously our massive, great big recording studio is actually sat at home, and it's a tiny little thing, and it's not obviously designed as a recording studio. And it's amazing how noisy pigeons are cooing away. You can hear them on the microphone and think, oh, crikey, what am I going to do about that? And just making all the windows are shut. But interestingly, I was putting the washing out, which is not that wasn't very interesting. But I was struck by how loud bumblebees are when you can actually hear them. So yes, I think you're right. That would be interesting to see if we can maintain that. And one final question: what are you most looking forward to doing once this is all over?
Seeing our children in the flesh. And sorry. I should be used to separation, but I'm not. And having the chance to see them in the flesh and to hug them again. Sorry, but that's to me what I'm really looking forward to. Sorry.
No. There's absolutely no need to apologise, and thank you for your candour there. I think we can all empathise with not being able to see family in these situations. We just have to do what is necessary to get through it. Gives us something to look forward to, of course.
Very much so, and I think it comes back to that fear thing that when you're separated from family and everything that means. And I think of those who do have friends and family in hospital and things like that, just how awful that is. We're all having to live with that. And I suppose that's one of those things that keeps us going in the darkest of times, is anticipating the joy of being together again.
So, Adrian, I would like to thank you very much for your time today.
That's great, and thank you very much, Steve. Can I just do one last thing, because I did forget it when I was talking about the charity?
Yes, of course you can.
One of the things that we do offer is sometimes it is very difficult within the charity world for people who need help to to navigate their way through the system, and they can end up getting sort of pinballed from place to place. We do have a support line, and if I can just give you the number and the email address, if you don't mind. Our support line number is 02393 871 568. That's 02393 871 568. And then the email address for that is support@rnrmc.org.uk. support@rnrmc.org.uk. And I'll send that over to you, Steve.
That's fantastic. And that is open to individuals, isn't it?
That is open to individuals who want help, guidance, and we have all sorts of calls about all sorts of different things. And what we will do always is ensure that whoever calls with whatever question does get to the right place that they need, or gets the right advice or support that they need.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a real privilege. Thank you for inviting me. Sorry I went a little bit hazy towards the end, but that's life.
Thanks again to Adrian Bell, CEO of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity. So, Mike, what did you think of that?
Steve, I thought that was a really, really interesting, in fact, riveting interview that you did with Adrian. And, you had a really, 30 plus years slice of his life, going from joining the Navy as a midshipman all the way up to his current role as the Chief Exec of Royal Navy Royal Marines Charity. I thought it was really interesting. He did a comparison of being on the front line because, as he said, when he joined the Navy as a midshipman, he was sent up to do some fisher protection. But as the Falkland War started, he then had to go down and help convert a trawler into a makeshift mine clearance vessel, and then proceed down to the Falklands to go. And so he has been on the front line. He does understand what being on the front line is about, and he can relate to our heroes of the NHS and other health professionals being on the front line today. I thought it was really, really interesting.
I quite agree with you. I must admit, I was quite surprised at the idea of a trawler being a minesweeper, but I haven't served in the Navy, so maybe that's more standard practice than I realised.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because I'm not sure that the Navy is necessarily set up to convert trawlers into minesweepers, but what I think the British are very good at is innovation, and in the way that we, try to do something we'd never done before. I think today there's a parallel where we're asking people, companies in Britain to design a new ventilator or come up with some other, turn a gin distillery into a hand sanitizing. I think the innovation of the British public to meet very serious challenges like we're in at the moment is I've never failed to be, gobsmacked really.
I quite agree, and I think also that leads me on to another question I'd like to ask, and that's how he's managing to adapt to working from home. I believe you were doing something similar as well. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's yeah. I have been working from home since I left the Navy 7.5 years ago. So actually, for me, this is not such a strange routine. But I think for many people, Adrian included, this is new. Not going into an office or not going to work outside of the home. But he's such a disciplined chap that actually, he's still got his routine. He gets up at 5:30 in the morning to do exercise. I get tired just thinking about people getting up at 5:30 in the morning. So we differ in that respect. But he's obviously, actually got some structure to his day, and I think that's quite important for a lot of people who are used to that working in an office environment, is to have some form of structure, some form of routine, and keep to it, even though you're actually not leaving the front doorstep.
Yes, again, it's a very good point. I must admit the 5:30 thing is not a time I would be accustomed to waking up, but I am, without a shadow of a doubt, waking up much earlier now that I'm on lockdown. So I'm not too sure what's causing that, but it's certainly affecting me. One final point, and a very poignant point, I think, was that Adrian was talking about, is that he's really missing his children and got quite emotional about that, I think.
I think this was the most riveting part of the interview, and hugely authentic. For someone like Adrian, who's been used to serving away from his family at sea for months and months on end, and similarly in submarines, separation was the norm. For him to not to be missing his children, his grown-up children, and and to have to collect a little bit of time as he thought about it, I thought was hugely a touching point. And my heart goes out to him because I think there's a lot of people that are missing the normal things that they can't have, whilst we are in this lockdown mode. So yeah, I love what he said. And I love the authenticity of it. I think that really rang true, and it will chime with many of your listeners.
Yes, it's the things that we all take for granted that are suddenly removed from us that perhaps have the most profound impact. How does the Navy help and support you with separation?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have a very good answer for it, which probably means that I think we cope with separation by being incredibly busy, which comes naturally because manning a ship or a submarine at sea, or being on operations if you're a Royal Marine, is incredibly hard work. And my life in submarines was 24/7. You didn't park the submarine at night time, or at weekends. It was operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the only time you could tell it was day and night is when the lighting in the control room went from white to red. The only time you could tell it was Sunday was because you had grapefruit segments, tinned grapefruit segments called seggies, for breakfast. That noted it was a Sunday, and there was usually a Sunday roast on at lunchtime. So we used to tell the days of the week by the food we ate, rather than any idea that it was actually the weekend or a weekday.
Interesting. So that's obviously about the impact upon you as the people that are serving. What kind of impact do you think it has on the people that are at home? Because obviously that was quite an important aspect of what Adrian was talking about.
Yes, that of course is very difficult for us, not being in their shoes, to really understand. We say we can try and understand it, but I don't think we can. I mean, my lovely wife, raised two children when I was away from home quite a lot, and so I have no real understanding, even though I try to, of all the burdens and pressures she had in bringing up two children under the age of two, whilst I was deployed in the Arabian Gulf. So all I know is that she did a fantastic job, and I'm forever indebted to her. And I think many naval families whose spouse, that does the burden of childbearing, whether it be the man or the woman, in today, I think deserves a medal for what they do, and they're the sort of unrecognised heroes of this.
Indeed, and I couldn't agree more. Well, thanks for that, Mike, and I'm really looking forward to the next time.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more, why not subscribe to the Lockdown podcast? To get in touch with Company of Makers, email us at lockdown@companyofmakers.com.